And what I read, you guys can fill in the blanks, is that you're going to be pushing back against what's known as the WPATH standards of care. The WPATH standards of care, which are insane. The WPATH standards just decided that they would eliminate the requirement that you have at least a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is not easy. It's not hard to get. But at least before you needed somebody to say you do have gender dysphoria, before you'd get the hormones or a surgeon to start cutting off your body parts. And this group, which is like the governing body on these things, just said, you know what? You don't even need that. It's just like, it's up to you. You know, your kid says he's gender dysphoric. Go ahead. You can chop off his penis. That's crazy. So that's just one of the things that you guys are trying to push back on, one of the WPATH regulations or pronouncements. Can you put it in context for us? What is WPATH and why does it need an alternative, which is what you're doing?
Well, WPATH started in about 1979. It was a fringe organization. Very, very few, people were interested in medical transition. And it was out on its own, and it was kind of self-identified authority for medical transition. Off it went, and it released these standards of care over the next few decades. So the first one was released in 1979. They kept on releasing different standards, and their most recent was released in 2022, which was the 8th version of their standards of care. And I would argue that it's quite a medicalized approach to gender diversity, i.e., it is showing the road ahead about how to medicalize, the difficulties with medicalization, the different complications that maybe a doctor might have and how to resolve them. And it's like looking at gender identity through a medical prism. And there isn't enough evidence base. There is no quality evidence base to support these standards of care. So arguably it's a self-identified standards of care because it's not really meeting the criteria for what usually a medical standards of care would be considered. And so what it is it's a lot of recommendations that have a very low quality evidence base in the research because the numbers are very small. The follow-up after surgery is diabolical. The tracing of, for example, post-medical transition suicide, the rates of that, they don't do good follow-up studies. So we don't know what happens after 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. There's very few studies and the numbers are very small. And the number of people who are lost to follow-up in these studies would make your head spin and make you think, I can't take this research seriously at all. So rather than Genspect offering another medical approach and saying, well, we're worrying about this and we're worrying about this and the quality of the research is low, we decided to turn the entire concept on its head and offer instead a framework for society. So this is a framework for schools, for prisons, for sports, for teachers, for psychotherapists, for families, for parents, for the whole of society. It's a framework that is like a policy document, and we're launching it in Denver at our conference. If you go onto our website, genspect.org, you'll easily find details about our conference. We're going to launch it at our conference, and it's going to be open for public review and consultation for the next 9 months, and then we're going to launch the official version next September. And why we're having our conference in Denver in Colorado is we've realized that over time the silencing of people like ourselves has been very, very detrimental to these young gender diverse kids. The really, really concerned people like myself and Joe, we've been silenced so often that we need to kind of fight back in quite an assertive way. So what we've done is wherever WPATH, who are, considered the authority on transgender healthcare, wherever they have their conference, we have our conference in the same town at the same time, so that clinicians can go to both conferences, so that we are challenging the mindset, the very, very unevidenced, narrow mindset that the only approach to being distressed about whether you're a boy or a girl or wanting to be a man or a woman, that the only approach is a medical, approach. Instead, we're offering our non-medicalized approach, saying, well, how about we look at gender in another way? It's almost like the psychotherapists are in one conference saying, why don't you deepen your relationships? Why don't you get to know your body and maybe make friends with your body? Why don't you maybe, get in touch with sports or maybe art, poetry, music, maybe friendships or love? I'm not sure what it is that's going to kind of get somebody out. There's lots of ways into gender dysphoria. There's lots of ways out of gender dysphoria. While up the road, arguably, the psychiatrists are talking about the different doses, the different kind of medication that is needed. So imagine if the psychotherapists were talking about depression, we'd be talking about all this kind of non-medicalized approach, while psychiatrists could be arguably talking about a medicalized approach. Joe might disagree with me with this analogy. Well, in Genspect, we're offering a non-medicalized approach to gender, saying, dress whatever you want, like J.K. Rowling's tweets, dress whatever you want, do whatever you want, present however you want. But that doesn't mean you can impose your gender identity on the rest of the world. That doesn't mean you can go into any team sports or be a 50-year-old in a 13-year-old swimming race or whatever. That doesn't give you carte blanche to do whatever you want because of your identity. Rather, you have to negotiate your life within society. And if you have gender diversity, there's lots of ways you can approach that. And it doesn't have to be hormones. It doesn't have to be mastectomies. It doesn't have to be phalloplasties or vaginoplasty. It doesn't have to be any of that. Just on one last point, the standards of care that was released by WPATH last year, 2022, it was an extraordinary document. They have a chapter on eunuch identities. Now, this is kind of going back to Roman days where men were castrated. And it's extraordinary to see this eunuch identity being offered up as if it's a healthy approach to somebody's gender distress, where they would, like I say, it's a castration. They also had a chapter on ethics, and they removed the chapter on ethics. Not only did they remove the chapter on ethics, they removed all the age minimum requirements for surgical interventions other than phalloplasty. So they might have had, even though I wouldn't have agreed with them because they were very, very young, they might have had minimum age requirements for a mastectomy to be 14 or, different kind of interventions to be different ages. Honestly, I think that's ridiculously and way too young. But they removed them all. So there's actually no minimum age requirement. And not only that, the harrowing stories of the detransitioners, and I've no doubt you're going to ask us about them, those awful, sad, terrible, terrible stories, they were reframed as just another step on a gender journey. As in, you might detransition, that's done. It's not as if something dreadful and medical malpractice has taken place. Rather, you've taken another step on your journey. So because WPATH have so badly lost their way, we feel it's very necessary to kind of, as such, have a conference in the same town as they're having. So Denver, Colorado next month. And
it's counter-programming. And just so that people know, WPATH stands for World Professional Association for Transgender Health. But did they, I know that the American Psychiatric Association, they've been captured by this. The American Academy of Pediatrics, they've been captured by this. So, would this be something that a school district, a parent in a school that's doing we're affirming behind the parent's back, would this eventually, what you're creating, be a document that, Joe, a parent could walk in there and say, oh, no, look at this. This is all America's psychologists. These are credentialed people.
Absolutely. Chapter 3 in the framework is about parents and schools. And the appendix includes model guidance for schools and school districts to replace the one that's currently in effect, which basically validates gender ideology and treats it as established fact. So there's model legislation, there's model schools policies, there's a lot of material that's going to be useful to members of society across the board. And I want to sort of emphasize this point that Stella made, is that this is a document that's geared not just to parents and children who are suffering from gender dysphoria, but it's a civilization-wide challenge to gender ideology, which has now been codified in laws, in school policies, treated as if it's fact when it's completely unevidenced. We feel that really, if we're going to do anything about gender dysphoria, if we're going to treat it in a different way from what WPATH is recommending, it has to be a society-wide challenge to the way gender ideology has taken hold everywhere, including, Megyn, as you mentioned, the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's everywhere.
Did you experience this on the parent level? Like the society around, I don't know how long ago that happened for you, but where everybody else was like affirming and wanting to set your daughter down this one path and you were back there going, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Well, totally. I mean, earlier in my practice, one of my very first cases when I was in training was a young woman who would today be, identified as trans-identified, who insisted she was a boy. And I worked with her for years and helped her come to terms with being a woman. And she became a mother. And it was a really satisfying experience for me. And so when my daughter announced that she was trans-identified, I already had some pretty well-developed views on this topic and what might be going on. Plus, I knew my daughter better than anybody else who was treating her. So yeah, I was like, this is insane. I mean, I think I probably wasn't terribly diplomatic. I think I was probably a little bit disdainful in saying, you can't become a boy. It's impossible to change your sex. I'm sorry. I just was very impatient with it. And then I was beaten down by the system of support all around her. Even then, this was 10 years ago. So the therapists, the teachers, the friends, everybody's championing her as, heroic for coming out as trans. So what are you supposed to do in that position if you're a parent? I work with a lot of teens whose parents have asked me to see them because they're trans-identified and they're trying to, so Stella has done this work too. You're trying to hold off from medicalizing. And I've lately come to feel very pessimistic about working with that cohort, with the kids only, because so much of the rest of the world is telling them something completely different. I mean, how do you challenge a delusion when so much of the world, teachers, friends, online people, are affirming the delusion?
With its share of aches and pains, but it doesn't mean you have to just accept it. Let me tell you about William from California and his Relief Factor story. William had debilitating back pain and tried all sorts of treatments with no luck. His sister insisted he give Relief Factor a try, and after a month, his back pain was gone. William says, I don't know how Relief Factor works, but it is a miracle. If you are living with aches and pain, see how Relief Factor, a daily drug-free supplement, could help you feel and live better every day. Relief Factor is 100% tested and packaged in the USA, trusted for more than a decade by more than 1 million pain-free customers. Say goodbye to aches and pains. Get started today with the Relief Factor 3-week Quick Start Kit. It's just $19.95 and it comes with a feel better or your money back guarantee. Visit relieffactor.com or call 1-800-4RELIEF. That's 1-800-4RELIEF. Live the life you love with Relief Factor. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.